Monday kickstart to get us thinking, reflecting, and perspective, because of course, this week concludes after Shabbat with the beginning of Pesach, our festival of springtime and our celebration of our freedom. Of course, the rabbis give the holiday of Passover 5 different names, from Pesach, the Paschal Lamb ceremony, Chag HaPesach, to Chag HaMatzot, the festival of matzah, to Chag HaAviv, the festival of springtime, to Zman Cherutenu, the time of our freedom and our redemption, to, of course, Passover and the celebration of the reality that we survived this experience. What is it for us today? I was really fortunate to have a chance to study last month with Rabbi Dahlia Marks, who's one of our professors at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, and was teaching about Passover. It made me think about a lot of things that are quite relevant in ancient tradition for us today. Because, of course, we all think of Pesach when we say Manash Tana, Halayla Hazeh. Why is this night different? And it gives us a chance to reflect on the evolution of the Passover Seder and its relevance, even more so in the midst of a pandemic. Right? So who thought a year ago we'd be talking about Passover again in the context of a pandemic, when we were just waking up to our world being upside down, not understanding what this all meant, that we were, for the first time ever, creating Seders on Zoom and figuring that out. And it was a time of, great constraint and difficulty for us. But even more, it became a time of great creativity. And interestingly enough, that is something we see to be the case in Jewish tradition, that in times of difficulty, Jews, our ancestors, have turned to creativity and creation. So if you look at Passover, it's emblematic of that. And that's what Rabbi Marks had taught in her lecture recently that I think became so enlightening to me, that reminder. The Seder, or let me go back, Passover, we're only given 2 commands that we follow according to the Torah. There's 3 commands that we do traditionally according to it with this holiday. 1, we sacrifice a Paschal lamb, the Paschal sacrifice, which occurs right before the holiday. Can't do that anymore. But 2 and 3 are that we eat matzah for 7 days. We remove leaven from our diet. And number 3, we tell the story. That's it. So all the other rituals and things that have come around Pesach are much more contemporary innovations, over contemporary being 2,000 years, of course, over time, because of certain challenges that we've experienced. Hey, as I talk about Pesach right now, feel free to throw questions into the YouTube chat if you have any, or into the Facebook chat as well, because Brian Fishman, always directing behind the scenes for Monday Morning Musings, is there for me and for you, and will throw those questions to me if they come up. So what I mean by that creativity and development of our Passover celebrations, look, Torah says you sacrifice a Paschal lamb, you tell the story, you eat matzah. So in the first temple period, that's what was really all that happened, was they sacrificed the lamb, right? Now, by the second temple period, temple's destroyed, first, 586 BCE. So what happens? So for a moment, they're unsure, and they begin to tell the story with testimonies. We see in Josephus's writings, recitations, testimonies that the people do. Paschal sacrifice can, of course, be reenacted with the temple being reconstructed after that. But then what happens when the second temple is destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, in what we call the Tannaitic period, from the 70 CE to the 3rd century. And that is where we get the ritual around how to tell the story, specifically the Seder, right? So, and it's interesting when people say that Jesus's Last Supper, right, the night before he's arrested, is a Passover Seder. That's incorrect, because the Seder doesn't get invented until later in time, until after Jesus died, until sometime between 70 CE and the 3rd century, right? And so it couldn't have happened that way. Could it have been a Passover meal, right? Possible. Other things about that we could talk at another time, but for now, Passover. So during these next 200 years, we get the Seder ritual. We get the discussion of 4 cups of wine, and each cup being connected to one of those verses in Torah that says what God did for us, freeing us with an outstretched arm, with a mighty hand, bringing us to the promised land, the ideas of that. We get the 4 questions, because there are certain things that are different, how we sit, how we eat, the foods that are in front of us, that should elicit questions to help us tell the story. We get the recitation of Psalms, the Hallel, that's brought into it as well. That, of course, was a part of the traditional sacrifice that we can't do anymore. And we get the story then later on in Midrash and Mechilta of the four children emblematic of who we might be or what we might be thinking, how we might behave, and how we want to behave. Now move ahead for the next 300 years, 3rd to 6th century, and we get how to tell the story. What we see now in the Haggadah of the Magid, the retelling of that story of our salvation from Egypt. It's told to us now in the Talmud that we were slaves, right? Hey, keeps going. What we see as you open up Haggadah today, next 400 years, from the 7th century to the 11th century, we have the first compilation of a Haggadah that may sort of look like ours, with the recitation of Halach Ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction, saying that in Aramaic, with Dayenu, that song we all adore, that for many of us is one of the great memories of Pesach, that elicits those emotions. We all can think of sitting around a table singing that together as well. The story of the rabbis in Bnei Brak who are studying and talking about Pesach so intently that they don't realize that the sun has risen and it's the next day and it's time for Shema, time for the morning prayers. That, of course, is around 10th, 11th century, we find that told, right? Middle Ages, 11th to 16th century, we find something unique that now comes into our telling of the story, things of this vindictive redemption that we see, because think of what was going on for the Jews in medieval times, how difficult it was. So we have this messianic messaging now that is woven into our storytelling, right? And from that time, we have these visual manuscripts and the artistic elevation of Haggadot. You know, traditionally, artwork isn't a part of our tradition because of the second commandment that we can't make engraven images, right? But in Haggadahs, in Ketubahs, wedding contracts, we see some of the earliest artwork. And it's not, of course, of people, it's of flowers, of springtime, of things that we celebrate, of scenes of Jerusalem, stuff like that too, right? Of what that messianic idea. Modern times, right? 18th, 19th century, we start seeing political, ideological things we woven into our Haggadahs. Dreams of Zionism comes in there too. And of course, in, you know, the past, I remember my first synagogue where I was a student rabbi in 1991, 92. 92 was my time at Passover in Selma, Alabama. That was my first student pulpit. Selma, Alabama, they were very traditional in their reform. And we used the Union Haggadah from 1911, and we also had the 1914 edition. In the Union Haggadah, of course, there's no mention of Israel. There's no mention of the Holocaust. There's no mention of the challenges of the 20th century. There was a time that was coming out of, oh, the pogroms are behind us. It was all about America as our Zion, as our land of freedom, as what we've been blessed with now, right? Obviously, in Haggadot that were created after the Holocaust, we have this real recognition of our modern slavery and the challenges our people have faced in the 20th century. And then the joy and the honor and the promise of Israel as a modern state, right? And so we see that in our Haggadahs today too. That being the case, oh, by the way, in that Union Haggadah, we sang America the Beautiful and My Country 'Tis of Thee, right? So really is a part of that Zion. So now back to modern times, we continue to look at it in our lens of modern oppressions, modern refugee crisis, modern challenges that we find. And so we start creating our own Haggadot. So pandemic for us today, you know, that we're reminded that this crisis is a catalyst for change. And look at Temple Shir Shalom and what we've been able to do and how we, of course, have adapted, changed, learned what works and what doesn't work, and what we will continue to do into the future, right? There's no doubt it has changed us as a community, and in a lot of positive ways, what we've learned about what helps us and what we need as a community. So I look at this now and see the pandemic as that catalyst for change and continue to be so in the context of our Seder, giving us the empowerment to realize that you don't need a rabbi to lead the perfect Seder. We all have that opportunity to be empowered, to be educated, to know how we can celebrate this differently. So in that context, with my last couple of minutes, right, we need to remind ourselves that there should be no barriers to how we celebrate Pesach. Eat matzah, tell the story. So what's the best way for you to tell the story? A year ago, our days were filled with chaos and confusion, right? That's been our long journey right now. So today, what are you going to do to make Pesach meaningful? And it's really up to you. We have a Temple Seder that we're doing on Zoom, and that will be creative and adaptive. I believe that you can only be on Zoom for so long. So what's the most important pieces of the Seder? There's certain parts we may cut out. We will cut out. Certain things we've added that are unique to this year. The idea of connecting. Now, this year is different than last year because I know, thank God, a lot of people have been vaccinated. And so because of that, some families are able to gather together, which is really a blessing. They haven't been able to do that for quite some time. They weren't able to do that for the high holidays, weren't able to do that around Hanukkah, but now they can. But a lot of us can't yet. And so we want to make it accessible to everyone, right? But you can do this yourself as well, and making it, what's important to you, what's part of our core identity as Jews. And I think being flexible and creative is part of that core identity. The relationships and friendships are part of who we are, and figuring out what matters most in the midst of this kind of experience and our Passover. So, look through Haggadah. We have Haggadah as a temple that you can have. Look through those and see what is the part that you're confident about, that you could teach, you could share, that you could sing, you could do together. You don't have to have a good voice. You just want to have energy. That's what it means, right? But tell the story in your own way. Ask the questions, create things. Some of the stuff that we're doing at Temple is we're asking everyone to make a sign. So if you sign up for the Temple Seder, you're going to come in the next few days and pick up your little goodie bag that's filled with a lot of different things. And so some of the questions in there, one, there's a template to make a sign. You're the first family to get across the Sea of Reeds. And now, like the end of a marathon, mile 25, people are rounding the corner. You got the sign to hold up to cheer people on, to encourage them that they're almost across the sea. What will your sign say? That's one thing. We're going to share those signs. Another idea is, what would you add to your Seder plate? What would you add to that? There are 5 things traditionally that are on the Seder plate: the maror, the bitter herbs, the roasted egg, representing that sacrifice, the paschal, the shank bone, the spring herbs or parsley or lettuce that we put on there too, right? And the choroset, right? The mortar that we might have. So many of us have added an orange to our Seder plates, which is actually not the inclusion of women or the leadership of women, as important as that is, but the original story is about the inclusion of the LGBTQ plus community and the importance of that, and valuing every life and every person in our community. So that's why the orange is there, so that everyone is recognized and we never leave someone out. But what new things, maybe this year uniquely, you might add to your Seder plate? So think about that. You all have the opportunity, just like a rabbi who was writing midrash commentary, 1800 years ago, to invent and create things that are relevant for us with the lens of this past year, whether it's talking about systemic racism and the challenges that our friends who are Jews of color, people of color in our community and in our country are experiencing. Or this past week, what we've talked about with the AAPI community, American, Asian, Pacific Islander community, and the hatred that's been thrown their way and how despicable that is, and standing together as a community. Or it's about our environment and climate change and the concerns we have around that, and bringing that to light and recognizing that as something we want to focus on this year. Or it is anti-Semitism that we're experiencing and feeling, or the refugee crisis and the immigration crisis, right, in our country and around the globe. So much that is relevant that we can bring. And part of telling our story of redemption, of freedom, is to give us the strength, the power to be able to use that to help us tackle these other challenges that are in our world, and never negate them or never deny they exist, but work to end them and work on them together. So that's my little teach for Pesach today, why I wanted to have the time, all for myself, just to share some thoughts on that, so that you could hopefully create something for yourself on Pesach and maybe make it even a little more meaningful for you, for your family, for your loved ones, for your friends, whoever you happen to gather with. Remember, I think my most important message to you right now is, it's not that low barriers are good. It's that no barriers are essential. No barriers in the midst of how we celebrate this holiday, right? So that you can engage yourself, your family, whoever, as much as possible. The barriers are because of a pandemic. So let's not create more to exclude, but let's do more to make this relevant in our lives as well. So look forward to more time like this together, and excited for the spring that Pesach always reminds us of. And looking at the calendar and the weather forecast, last year it was snowing on the first night of Passover here in Michigan. So I'm excited that it looks like it won't be this year, right? Other good things on our calendar, of course, that are coming up this week as we prepare for Pesach. It's fairly calm and nice services this week as we get ready for the Seder. Saturday night is the first night of Pesach. Sunday, our community Seder. It's not too late to sign up, and we'll get you the information you need for that as well. So, my friends, have a great week. Stay safe, and wishing you all a Chag Pesach